It seems that there's an epidemic right now of exhaustion and fatigue. What's causing that?
I can honestly tell you without question the data is incredibly supportive. 90% of your energy comes from rest and healing.
In this society, we do so many things that drain our energy and not enough things that cause us to gain energy.
A lot of people complain about fatigue, but when they go to the doctor, they might not necessarily have any abnormal lab values or anything like that.
Crappy food, stress all the time, you put those two things together and you end up with poor hormones, high cortisol levels, high insulin levels, and we're just exhausted.
There is an epidemic, a global epidemic of fatigue and exhaustion because of the environment.
There's a sort of obvious link between our physical energy levels and our mitochondria, our cellular energy generators.
The westernization of the human diet has absolutely compromised our health, and it's compromised our ability to function.
Leaky gut turns into leaky brain. All of a sudden you have all of these things that are slowing down the immune system, which is going to cause this chronic fatigue that we're feeling.
We are exposed to more toxins in our environment than we ever have been.
When you're diagnosed with an autoimmune disease, by definition, you're in adrenal depletion.
Fasting has been shown to increase mitochondrial production on its own, which is amazing. Even there's no drug even out there or even a supplement that can do that.
We are no longer able to get away from that fight or flight. We are in our sympathetics. We are always ready to run. And the deleterious effects that that has on our physiology are profound.
Talking about fatigue from an Eastern tradition or medicine perspective, it opens up a whole lot of questioning, investigation, treatment options, including energy healing that we don't have in Western medicine.
You have to forgive yourself. This isn't necessarily your fault. You just happen to be living in the 21st century.
Welcome to the Exhausted docu-series. I'm Dr. Pedram Shojai, New York Times bestselling author and filmmaker of several films and series on health and wellness.
And I'm Nick Palizzi, founder of The Sacred Science and producer of several documentaries and docu-series.
If you or someone you love has been suffering with low energy and fatigue, you know how debilitating it can be. Everything in life runs on energy, and when our reserves are low, we've got problems. In fact, our overall health, immunity, and mental clarity all hinge on the amount of available energy in our bodies.
Exhaustion and fatigue are now at epidemic levels. They need to be looked at as the true root cause of the many chronic diseases we're suffering from. And because they weaken the body's immunity, exhaustion and fatigue are also key factors in our susceptibility to deadly viruses and disease.
This 9-part groundbreaking series explores what's causing it and reveals the new science and discoveries about how to treat it, all from the country's leading healthcare professionals. Watch, recharge, and get your energy back. Boost your immunity and get your life back.
The great news we have to share is that there's hope for you. In fact, following the advice of the experts in this series can bring your energy back, recharging your body and powering your cells. We've assembled the Exhausted series into 9 episodes that are easy to follow and filled with the information you need. Pedram's now going to start us off on this journey to take back your energy.
We begin with some amazing highlights featured in the series, all from experts who've devoted their lives to helping people day after day with symptoms of exhaustion. I've personally seen thousands of patients in my clinical practice, and if energy was low, I knew results would be hard to achieve. I always focused on bringing up the vitality of my patients so that their bodies could truly heal. Let's begin our journey now.
I think exhaustion is probably the most common thing that brings people into my practice. And I think with exhaustion and fatigue is there's so many reasons why people feel tired. You know, it can be anything that their thyroid's underactive, it could be that they're stressed out, it could be that they don't sleep, and sometimes it's something like an underlying infection. So I think it's important for people to understand that if they're tired all the time, they really need to see their physician and find out the root cause of the problem, because the treatment's really going to depend on what the problem is, because everything might have a slightly different treatment. So it's really important for people to understand, you know, what it is that's really the undermining cause of their fatigue.
There are so many reasons to why we're so exhausted today. I mean, we live in a world where not only are we super toxic, and we have environmental toxins that are slowing down our mitochondria, which can lead to mitochondrial dysfunction. We also have a lot of viruses and pathogens. So whether it's like parasites or candida overgrowth and mold, the yeast, that slows down our system. In the past 20 years, we've experienced about 130 extra hours of work. So that's 4 weeks where we could be nurturing our bodies, where we could be spending time with our families, where we could be sleeping, just being in nature, grounding, getting some vitamin D. So all of these things, like when we're stuck in our little boxes in front of the computer under the fluorescent lighting, you know, that's gonna mess up our circadian rhythm. And so when that happens, then we have cortisol, and cortisol is our stress hormone. So when you have a spike in cortisol, if that spike and that fatigue doesn't go away, like that stressor doesn't go away, then all of a sudden we're going to have so much cortisol production that it's going to start to decrease and level down. And with that, then you have, like, for women, you're going to have low progesterone, then infertility rates are on the rise. So there's a lot of things that are slowing up our immune system to cause this fatigue. People are doing so much more now than we've ever done before. It's not natural for us to just like be in this high-paced society with everything at the reach of our fingertips. And so the more we are exposed to, the more we want to do. The more we want to do, the more we burn out. So we have to be very conscious of, you know, where we're putting our energy, and also to understand in this human body, we only have so much energy output to give out before there starts to become a disease process.
Historically, we faced acute stresses. There'd be somebody chasing us or trying to kill us, or a lion or tiger chasing us, and then it would be over. Either we're killed or we escape and everything goes back to normal. In our world today, we're inundated with chronic stressors. We live often isolated lives in our nuclear families, or worse, without any other persons. We are constantly bombarded by bad news. We are constantly on our devices, which is exhausting, both from a physiologic point of view with the light, as well as just constant stimulation, and brain hitting with dopamine is very fatiguing over time. Our diet has degraded dramatically. We don't exercise. Only 8% of Americans get the exercise that's recommended. We are exposed to increasing environmental toxins, which have an impact. All these things have served to drive us to an exhausted society.
We have two sort of critical pieces of this fatigue puzzle. And one is sort of total body stress load, a variety of different stressors that we can have, from circadian rhythm disruption and sleep deprivation, to toxins in the environment, to poor nutrition, to poor gut health, to psychological and emotional stress and emotional trauma, and a variety of other layers to this story. And then all of this total body stress load then interacts with our body. And what's going on in our bodies, our cellular energy potential, and what I call our mitochondrial reserve capacity, which is sort of our body's or our cells' ability to cope with stress and their capacity to produce energy. And there's sort of an interaction between those two pieces of the puzzle. So what leads to fatigue, fundamentally from my perspective, is a combination of a body being overwhelmed by a stress load that is too large, combined with a body that has lost its resilience and has lost its what I call the resilience threshold, or this reserve capacity, this capacity to deal with stressors and maintain homeostasis.
We all have the capacity for resiliency. I mean, we're born with it, right? So how do we lose it, and why can't everyone bounce back from exhaustion?
Personally, I believe that the number one reason that people are so tired and exhausted and worn out is because of increasing stressors. I work with clients in group programs primarily on gut health. So people are coming to me with either digestive disorders or gut-based issues like autoimmunity or various things like that. And what I find fascinating is that over the years, I've been doing this for over 12 years now, and recently I started focusing more on relieving stress, and not the normal traditional stress relief like, oh, meditate, pray, chill out, not that kind of thing, but like helping people actually remove major stressors from their lives. And I've seen faster improvement in people's health through doing this avenue than almost anything else, because people are so educated at this point, right? They know how to eat healthy. The mainstream has caught on to being healthy. So if people are getting the food piece right and the movement piece right, and they're still really sick, there's got to be something else going on. And obviously, like, you know, there's other issues below this, like the gut health stuff, there's infections and many things like that, but I still believe that those are even being exacerbated by stress. So at this point in time, stress is the number one thing that I'm tackling with people when they're exhausted.
The chronic stress is really where I think we are getting into this, like this cultural norm where we have, you know, whether it's aberrant relationships in our personal life, in our work life, we have, you know, exposure to toxins that we're not properly disposing of, or we have physical or unresolved physical trauma, or emotional trauma for that matter as well. And it moves us into this sympathetic dominance, meaning that we are no longer able to get away from that fight or flight. We are in our sympathetics. We are always ready to run. And the deleterious effects that that has on our physiology are profound. We have, you know, our metabolism is affected. We have our thyroid that's affected. We have sleep and circadian biology that's affected. So it's really, when we think about in modern day life, we are scheduled from the moment we wake up to the moment that we, you know, go to sleep at night. We have pressures at work. We have this idea that we have to consume and consume and consume social media, buy all the things, keeping up with the Joneses, all of that sort of cultural phenomena. And that, I think, is leading to the sympathetic dominant, stressed out, exhausted, and tired population that we have today.
Well, I think everyone's looking for a quick fix. They're looking for something to alleviate their immediate concern. And it works. It works really quickly to take something, and it works only in the short term. And so part of the epidemic of exhaustion is that we are becoming more and more desperate for the next hit of something that is going to be able to alleviate our fatigue. And for those people who end up coming to me, they have literally tried it all. Well, they haven't actually tried it all. They've tried all of the quick fixes. What they actually haven't done is really looked at and analyzed their life to understand what's the root cause of what's causing that exhaustion. For some people, it's blood sugar. For other people, it's a lack of purpose in their life. For others, they don't sleep well. For some people, there's emotional exhaustion because they're carrying certain burdens. And so when those quick fixes run out, it's usually when people go, I think I need to look a little bit deeper in terms of understanding where I need to go to alleviate that problem. I also think the body's intelligent. And so when a problem or a solution isn't solving the problem any longer, the body gives us the opportunity to address it in different ways. So I don't think of the symptoms of exhaustion as being a problem. I actually think they are our gift, but it is really our opportunity, and it's our necessity then to look at those symptoms and look at it as an opportunity to actually go deeper.
Why are we fatigued? Why is your brain fatigued? Why is your thyroid fatigued? Why are your adrenals fatigued? Because we're fighting the stress of all of these toxic chemicals that the body has no mechanism to protect you from. We have no mechanism. We have the exact same body as our ancestors thousands of years ago. We have the same kidneys. They work just the same gallbladder, the same immune system. What did the immune system of our ancestors have to protect us from? Bugs, parasites, viruses, molds, fungus, and bacteria. That was it. There was no polysorbate 80 or red dye number 42 or mercury or lead that was in high concentrations. There was none of that. But today, our bodies are having to fight thousands of chemicals every single day. We know that 60 to 65% clinically of all Alzheimer's patients that are diagnosed are inhalation Alzheimer's. It's what they're breathing that's triggering the inflammation in the brain that eventually kills off so many brain cells, and you get all that plaque. It's called Alzheimer's. 60 to 65% is because of the air pollution of what we're breathing. That's indoor air and outside air. We know that the food we're eating is loaded with toxic chemicals, the water we're drinking. That's the reason, primary reason, why this is happening today and it never happened before. Is our bodies are not designed, we don't have a defense mechanism against all these compounds, but the stress response gets activated, so our adrenal glands, trying to protect us, trying to save us, gets a stress response. You burn out the body, the adrenal glands become the size of a peanut, and they're supposed to be the size of a walnut, and then we just don't have the fight, flight, or fright response capabilities anymore, and then we need 4 cups of coffee a day to keep going.
You see patients troubled by fatigue or exhaustion. How common is it and how hard is it to treat successfully?
I love it when people come and tell me that they're tired, because it's one thing that I can really help them with that we see significant changes for. And I love it because when you get to the root cause and you really address that, that's when you see such a big change in people's energy. And instead of using a Band-Aid approach, drinking more coffee, or even taking herbal blend to give you an energy boost, finding the root cause is the key. And you get to the root cause, then you can help your energy, you're going to address that fatigue, but you're also going to help your health in so many other ways. I focus a lot on skin, and our skin is this outer reflection of inner health. And again, when you get to the root cause, you're going to be able to help your skin, you're going to help your energy, you're going to help also get your ideal weight, sleep better at night, have better mental clarity and focus. It just helps your health in so many ways, prevent and address many different chronic diseases. So getting to the root cause is the true key.
Energy powers every cell and function of the body, so we need to take a holistic look at why we're feeling tired. We dig and discover. Once we solve it, we're free. We have just heard many of the reasons why you may be feeling tired. We'll do a much deeper dive as we move forward and, in the episodes ahead, help you narrow it down for yourself. Here are some of the key things our experts laid out as the foundation for better energy. To have ample energy and function correctly, the body needs both of these: a healthy resilience threshold and good reserve capacity. Here are some of the main reasons for exhaustion, which we'll dive deeper into over the series. Increasing life stressors, environmental toxins, lack of rest or sleep, poor gut health, infections, viruses, or tick bites, blood sugar issues, emotional exhaustion. How we move and use our bodies is a key factor in energy levels. Toxins and heavy metals can shut down our energy metabolism. Our overall body burden needs to be optimized so we can boost our energy.
Before we go any further, we want to ask you to share this series with your friends and family. This free screening is an exclusive event that ends in a few days. Each episode is only up for 24 hours. Now is the time to invite your loved ones in so they don't miss a second of this life-saving material. Do them a favor and give them the gift of health. Please take a moment to share this series far and wide right now. Thank you. Energy is so embedded in everything we see, hear, and do that it's easy to take for granted.
It's the fuel of life, and when that light starts flickering, we start to take notice.
That's when many of us borrow energy from tomorrow to get through today with coffee and stimulants.
It's like robbing Peter to pay Paul once we hit that breadline of energy. It's no fun.
This dance of desperation can be costly. If we're able to make ends meet energetically, we're fine. But boy, is it rough when that changes.
And those changes do come, the result of taxing the adrenals as we keep plodding forward. Then there's a price to pay and that bill comes due.
Before we decide what we think works best for us, we need to understand where our energy originates and what can get in the way of it.
And that's where we'll start. We're going to take a look at where energy comes from and what makes it happen. This will help you with a better understanding of exhaustion and fatigue and the various solutions we'll be featuring throughout the series. Nick's going to take the lead on this next segment.
How we derive energy is a profound and complicated process. So we asked healthcare professionals around the country to explain it in terms we can understand. It's actually quite miraculous when you think about it. And as with most things, it makes sense to have an understanding of creating energy before buying into solutions for reversing your fatigue and exhaustion. Let's jump in and explore our energy origins and our relationship with stimulants.
I think most people think if they're tired, maybe they need to eat more, to boost their energy levels. And so there's this concept of you're not eating enough, you're not eating the right thing. I think if people stop looking at calories and calories in and how many calories are going out, they'd kind of learn more about where energy comes from.
Our energy comes primarily from two places, and that's the oxygen that we breathe and the food that we eat. Both are absolutely critical and necessary. Obviously, oxygen you have to have every minute, or at least very, very often. You can't go without it for very long. Food you could go without for longer, but we have to have blood sugar every second. So one way or another, the nutritional constituents that we need in our diet have to be there every second for the body to function.
When you look at lasting energy, at true energy, at non-transient, non-short-term energy, a big part of that is related to mitochondrial function. Specifically, the ability of the mitochondria to be able to, particularly from things like fatty acids or ketones, rely upon stable, slow-burning sources of energy to produce ATP.
ATP is our cellular currency. It's really critical because every cell in our body makes that, and that's how our body gets energy to survive and breathe and detoxify. Pretty much every process in the body is fueled.
Most people know that we eat so that we can get nutrients. And so we have our fats, we have our carbohydrates, and our proteins. And our body then has to transform this into energy. In order to convert that carbohydrate, protein, and fat into energy, that takes the gut, the liver, and then on a cellular level, that's done at the mitochondria. The mitochondria is sort of that fuel, that house, that powerhouse where that energy now is converted using oxygen. So we use the carbon, the hydrogen, and the oxygen from our surrounding environment, the air and the food we eat, and then we convert that into ATP.
Energy comes from the air we breathe and the food we eat. Let's talk about the food, which brings nutrients to our cells, or the mitochondria, right?
The nutrients that we consume are going to make up that chemistry that's going to create energy, that energy cycle, the Krebs cycle, or the mitochondrial respiratory chain. So we really want to feed that cycle. And we need things like B vitamins. We need magnesium. We need other micronutrients so that that cycle goes around.
The Krebs cycle, which we all learned, I think, in chemistry class, and we never thought it'd be useful to why are we learning it, is actually so important in how you feel. And your vitality, your longevity, the amount of energy you have throughout the day is actually all dependent on how well that cycle works. It's sort of the way your body uses oxygen to create energy. A lot of nutrients are needed for that, and the mitochondria has to work well for that to occur properly.
Creating ATP, you need a lot of different nutrients, and you need to have a clean environment. And that's where having a nutritional, clean air, clean water, clean food, and no infections and no toxic exposures, that creates the perfect environment for the ATP to flourish and to be used as cellular energy.
We do it differently with carbohydrates, protein, and fat. We actually get a lot more ATP and fuel from fat than from protein. And the worst is sort of the glucose, the simple carbohydrates like fruit and things that are very easily, they give us quick energy, but they don't last.
It's important to understand that the quality of energy production does significantly depend on the fuel that is used by the mitochondria to produce this energy. And that leads us to the notion that using ketones, for example, is a far more efficient way to create these molecules of energy currency called ATP, while at the same time doing so with less production of the damaging free radicals in comparison to utilizing glucose as a fuel source.
Even if there are adequate fatty acids, adequate ketones, adequate nutrients on board for the mitochondria to be able to generate ATP, in many cases the mitochondria is damaged, or you don't have good mitochondrial density. And in many cases, this can be due to everything from cellular damage due to oxidation and inflammation from the diet or from the environment. These days, it's increasingly an issue with so-called dirty electricity or non-native EMF, which can affect your calcium channels and the membranes that the mitochondria rely upon in order for electrons to be transported efficiently across the membrane.
Energy production in our cells, particularly in our mitochondria, it's pretty complex, but we'll be getting to more of that in later episodes. I want to talk about sleep here. So many people struggle with sleep, and we know that it affects our moods and is very relevant to fatigue. Can we dive in?
When people are tired, they're grumpy. It just comes together. You see it in little kids, if they haven't gotten a good night's sleep, they're going to throw a temper tantrum. Adults do it too. We have to have our sleep to help with our mood. It goes hand in hand. If we don't get the sleep, if we don't have the energy, we are going to be grumpy.
When you look at chronic fatigue and sleepiness, many times you can look at it from a purely medical standpoint, or you can look at it from an emotional standpoint. So let's start with medical and we'll move to emotional. So when you look at it medically speaking, you're looking at fatigue versus actual sleepiness. Fatigue is actually something that you feel throughout your body. You can have fatigue really from a muscular level almost anywhere. Sleepiness is pretty much just in the head. And so what you have a tendency to find is that when people are sleepy, it's not that they're too tired to do something. Tired is kind of being misused there. It's actually that their body is shutting down because it wants to sleep. There's a very big difference between that and fatigue, which is usually on the muscular level. A muscle's been used to a certain point and it's no longer functioning the way it should. Now, you could probably use that definition to probably look at sleep deprivation as well, but really, technically speaking, those two are very different things on the medicine side. Emotionally, it's very interconnected. Sometimes it's really hard to tease apart the difference between fatigue and sleepiness between an individual, just from an emotional standpoint. And if you ask somebody, hey, how do you feel? They're going to say, oh, I feel exhausted and tired and fatigued. And they think all three of those words mean basically the same thing. In my line of work, those actually mean three different things.
What ends up happening with that is then people are put on antidepressants or psych medications because they have low energy. So then they're moody and they're snappy and they're depressed. And so then they're put on medications instead of what's really going on? Why are you upset? Why are you low energy? What is going on beneath it? So before you go and get that prescription, what is really going on here? What's behind that change in your mood?
Don't ignore your exhaustion, fatigue, or sleepiness. You don't need to keep it. There are tools and there are treatments to help you figure out what's really going on. The problem is it's a mess. There's nothing easy about deciphering if you've got fatigue versus exhaustion versus sleepiness. But if you follow it, you will be able to eventually figure it out and hopefully be able to get on a better path.
If you have low energy or fatigue, it can definitely affect your mood. But can it go the other way? Your mood creating low energy and creating fatigue.
Our mood can affect our energy, and our energy affects mood because they share many of the same precursors. For example, epinephrine, you've heard of someone getting in the hospital like an epi shot to wake them up, to give them energy. Norepinephrine, these are the neurotransmitters and things that give us energy. Well, that's actually the precursor for dopamine. And dopamine is that, happy hormone, the one that motivates you, the one that now we're finding a lot of addictions, right, are linked to that. Tyrosine, again, another one that converts and is needed for thyroid hormone. So a lot of the things that help your mood actually have the same precursors, or can actually deplete your mood, have the same precursors as neurotransmitters that can affect energy. So they're very much interconnected. And often you'll see when one is off, it's affecting the other. It's very rare that I've ever seen someone with perfect mood and everything is okay and your transmitter is okay, and somehow they're just very, very, very low in energy. There's often a connection. And it's my job to figure out, wait, which one is more often, which one is the cause, you know? And so sometimes we'll look at your epinephrine, norepi, how you're breaking that down. Is that causing anxiety? You know, because often the genetics that you have might be the reason why you have a lot of energy, but this energy is restless and it can make you worry if it's not broken down.
The way you feel at the moment is based on neurotransmitters in your brain, which are basically just hormones that happen to be in your brain, and then the things we call hormones, many of which are exactly the same chemicals in the two different places. Those are in your body, and they send messages throughout your body and your brain. So certain neurons get activated in your brain, certain organs get activated in your body, and that controls things like blood sugar and heartbeat and blood pressure, and all those things add up to be the mood that you're in at the moment.
If you're thinking that your job sucks, then you're going to feel exhausted and probably depleted in the morning and like you don't want to go to work. And then that emotion is going to affect the choices that you make about going to work. You may be late, you may be resistant, you may be self-sabotaging and arriving, you know, in a rush or very late, and all that can start to drain your energy. It starts to leak out of your container.
Your mind, your personality, your emotions are related to what's happening in your body. And of course, we all know that our mind can control our body. If you're feeling happy, you don't notice that pain in your knee. But when you're feeling down, you give that attention. There's a feedback between both of those things, and they're mediated by hormones. These neurotransmitters and hormones are the things that send those messages back and forth. So anything that elevates our mood is likely to help our body feel better and give us energy. And likewise, in yoga, it's said that you can change your entire mood in 3 minutes. And it's just a matter of picking the proper technique, the proper exercise that stimulates a particular gland, temporarily secrete a little bit more of that hormone, and you can feel different very quickly. Now, that's not a good long-term solution because, again, the whole system is chronically dysregulated. So they all are having trouble doing their job, and you can sort of take some stress off the system by using an adrenal hormone, a sex hormone, a thyroid hormone as a substitute for what your body otherwise would have done, but it doesn't heal anything in the long run. It's not a bad thing to do, but it doesn't get at the root cause. Likewise, a depression from life circumstances uses up a lot of energy, and in your body, energy is chemicals, and so those things get used up. Your body doesn't have them to use for other things. Very much a connection between mood and energy.
A lot of times, if people can just start to look at the things that they're saying to themselves, the things that they're thinking, and identify what those are, even just writing them down, then they can start to see, how do I feel when I think this thought that my job stinks? And then they can start to look at, how would I feel if I didn't have that thought? And that's where you can start to bring mindfulness into the things that you're thinking in regards to energy and the type of energy that you're going to either choose to have or not choose to have.
One of the choices that many people make every single day when they want more energy is to go for a stimulant, caffeine being one of the primary ones. Is this a good idea?
People can have ebbs and flows in their energy level, and sometimes people can boost their energy in natural ways that can be healthy. And then people can boost their energy by reaching for some stimulant. You know, the one that we commonly use here is caffeine. Some people are more sensitive to caffeine than others, so they might feel more of those negative side effects, feeling jittery or overstimulated, overwired. But when we reach for those consistently, then we're just putting a Band-Aid on it, a temporary fix, and that may pull you further out of balance, which then makes you feel even more exhausted.
There are plenty of upsides of caffeine. I love caffeine. I have 2 cups of coffee every morning, and I'm proud to say that. I think it's, maybe it's self-serving, pun intended, but we know that caffeine helps to turn on BDNF, which is a powerful growth hormone for the brain. But in addition, caffeine is also an important way to upregulate something called NRF2. Now, let me digress for just a moment. The NRF2 pathway is sort of a gatekeeper pathway for augmenting our body's ability to reduce inflammation, increase antioxidant production endogenously within our bodies, and also amplifies our detoxification pathways. That's another benefit of consuming caffeine. Caffeine, though, inhibits adenosine, and adenosine is what is necessary for what we call sleep pressure, what sort of forces us or makes us feel sleepy and fall into sleep. And that's the reason that caffeine really gets us to a very alert state. And the problem with that is, the half-life of caffeine may be as much as 6 to 7 hours, so that when people are generally feeling that their tank is empty and are powering themselves with caffeine throughout the day, what does that do? There's caffeine on board in the evening time. They're not going to get restorative sleep, and guess what? Come the next day, they're going to feel crummy again. Their energy levels are low, and it's a vicious cycle that never ends.
The idea about coffee berries, when it was first discovered in Ethiopia, monks who were getting up at 3, 4 in the morning to chant noticed that the goat herd from the monastery going up to the top of the mountain would see that the goats that were eating off this particular bush were really frisky and having a great day. So he brought some of the berries down, but they were really bitter when they tried to eat them. So the person who was in charge of these things down at the monastery said, well, I don't know, maybe we could roast them like we do with other nuts that are bitter. And sure enough, they made coffee, and all the monks were able to get up at 4 and sing their songs and have a happy life. Since those early days, we've learned a great deal about the cultural relationship of caffeine-containing plants and how people sometimes need stimulants. But we're not talking about going to the Mr. Coffee Pot at the office all day, 4, 5, 8 cups, and that 3:30 in the afternoon slump and going for more stimulants, and that being the same as somebody having a cup of coffee when they really want a stimulant. When you stimulate, you empty out, and pretty soon you have 3 drops left in the well, and you're going to crash. And then you're going to need a stronger jolt of some kind of stimulant, which is why so many of these are on the marketplace, and you see them when you go to the checkout stand. They're in those bright labels for a reason, to get our attention when we're dragging ourselves. So stimulants are a potential toxin as well as a medicine. It's about the dose, and it's about the consciousness of the person who's using the stimulant. How long, how much, what for, and with what kind of mindfulness?
What I generally recommend is for people to stop caffeine. And then if they want to reintroduce it once they've taken care of their sleep efficiency and their diets to reduce inflammation, if they want to resume caffeine before 12 o'clock or before 2 o'clock in the afternoon, depends on what works for them, then that might be a good idea. I would caution individuals who are drinking 3 to 5 cups a day that when you stop caffeine cold turkey, there's a rebound effect. I see it quite commonly. We can temper the downsides of that rebound effect with lots of magnesium on board and a good B-complex vitamin. But people, if you're going to stop caffeine cold turkey, should probably do it on a weekend or whatever the days off that you may have. Some people work weekends and take Wednesday and Thursday off. But recognize that when you suddenly stop caffeine after you've habituated to it, you might not feel really great. You might curse my name for having heard this from me. But ultimately, up to 2 cups of coffee a day, I think, is not unreasonable, but it is something that should absolutely come to a screeching halt before 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And it's well beyond coffee. Most teas, if it's not an herbal tea, may well contain caffeine, as does chocolate. I've been a big proponent of a couple of squares of chocolate, 80% cacao or greater, as a treat when you're on your very low carbohydrate diet or low refined carbohydrate diet. But I learned from personal experience that that's not a good idea with dinner, because there's caffeine there too, and that's not what you want to do.
You really want to support the body, and you don't want to wait. You don't want to use these Band-Aid approaches and covering it up, because eventually it's going to catch up with you. And I know that I hear people, especially like in their 20s and 30s, say, oh, well, I'm just going to drink more coffee. I don't really need sleep. I'm just going to keep going and keep going. And I will just do more supplements, or I'll do more hormones. I'll do testosterone shots, whatever I need to do to keep. Eventually, it catches up with people. And so that's why it's so important to build a foundation. And it's never too late to do it, but the earlier you start, the better. So whatever decade of life you're in, whether you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, like it's never too late, but start really looking at what can you do to support your body so that, and that's what naturopathic medicine is a lot of about, is our bodies are so wise, and we have these great mechanisms in place with our bodies. And we just give it the right tools and the right support, then it's amazing what our bodies can do. And you could be in your 70s and have more energy and have less pain and all of that. If you just provide the right environment, the right support for your body.
The fact that the energy that runs our lives comes from little packets of sunlight is profound and empowering once we learn how to harness it. It's amazing that we weren't taught these things at school as young children to have the best possible lives. We're not really educated about health at all in our schools, are we? Well, now that we understand the vital role of energy in our cells, it's time to make changes using the tools we learn in the upcoming episodes. Here are some of the main points to remember. Essentially, energy on planet Earth comes from packets of sunlight stored in chemical bonds that are broken apart in the mitochondria. Adenosine triphosphate, or ATP, is the major energy source where we store this energy and use it where it's needed. It's our cellular currency. The gut, liver, and mitochondria are all involved in energy metabolism. Carbohydrates, proteins, and fats can all serve as energy sources, and the optimal diet to extract energy efficiently will differ from person to person. The overuse of stimulants like coffee and tea don't give us energy. They use cortisol and other hormones to tap our reserves, causing many problems down the line. Caffeine upregulates the NRF2 pathway and BDNF in your brain. It also acts as an adenosine receptor antagonist, which keeps us alert but dampens sleep. It has a 6 to 7 hour half-life, so you should stop consuming it after 2 p.m. at the latest.
There's a powerful relationship between our cells and an ancient form of bacteria that entered the nucleus of these cells billions of years ago. These mitochondria are considered the powerhouse of our cells.
We need to understand how they work and how we can best take care of them. If we look out for them, they'll take good care of us.
Over the past few years, we've learned that mitochondria do more than just produce energy. They signal for growth and epigenetic upregulation when times are good.
And they signal for defense when they're overloaded with stress and toxins, reducing the amount of energy they produce for us.
This is a critical piece of the puzzle when studying exhaustion, and it's a relatively new understanding that's changing medicine.
In this next segment, we're going to learn more about mitochondria and why it's so critical to stay clean in the modern world. They're very sensitive to environmental toxins, and when hampered, again, we feel it in the form of low energy. Here's Pedram in a segment that's all about your mitochondria.
To me, mitochondria are the most amazing part of the story of life. A primitive bacterial organism that joined us to work together eons ago. Before this happened, the primitive prokaryotic cells were simple blobs doing basic stuff. Afterwards, eukaryotic cells, with their new relationship with mitochondria in their nucleus, were able to organize better and continue to evolve thanks to the boost in available energy. This had huge implications for who we are and how we function. Let's explore.
I love to talk about the cellular level. It's something that seems abstract on a day-to-day. You know, we aren't usually thinking about how our bodies are made up of trillions of cells. And yet those cells, inside of our cells, is where all of our energy is produced and where our nutrients are used to produce energy. And so, actually, what's happening inside of our cells is essential to our well being every day. And one of the important parts of inside the cell is something called the mitochondria. The mitochondria are the energy producers in our cells. And so we really want our mitochondria working well in order to give us energy. But those same mitochondria are greatly affected by the various stresses we're exposed to. They're affected by lack of sleep or toxins or just pushing ourselves too high and having high stress hormones in our body affects our mitochondria. So it's no wonder that we would feel tired if stress is not allowing our mitochondria to make enough energy for us.
So mitochondria are these little bean-like structures, and what they basically do is they're the factory house or the powerhouse of the cell, and they basically take the end products of glucose from the citric acid cycle, another pathway, and then they eventually start to make this compound called ATP. But as it does that, it also produces a little bit of inflammation, oxidative stress. So as we get older and older, our mitochondria reserves actually go down just by normal aging, and then we tend to produce more inflammation than energy if things go wrong. So the normal physiological aging process is we become less efficient over time with our mitochondria. But some people reach their mitochondrial compromises at younger ages. So someone can have significant inflammation or an autoimmune disease, and they can start to have severe inflammatory cascades, and they lose their mitochondrial potential, and then they start to have significant fatigue.
What we call aging is simply the deficiencies of ATP in cellular fuel. It's that simple. And often that results in lack of glutathione, which is a detoxification chemical that we create. We can take it as a supplement. But all of these things transpire down the road due to this lack of cellular currency. And really, some of you are like, oh, I'm just getting older. My skin is wrinkled. I'm getting more tired when I exercise. I don't sleep as well. My thinking isn't as clear. Those are all signs of the ATP and the cellular energy process not working like it should. And this happens in the little, it's like the little engines in each cell called the mitochondria.
Just in the last few years, there's a lot of evidence coming out that mitochondria are not just these sort of mindless energy generators. They actually have this whole other role that is critically important when it comes to our health and when it comes to energy specifically. And that role is as danger sensors. So it turns out the mitochondria actually play an integral role in what's called our innate immune system. And specifically, they're they function as these sort of environmental sensors where they are almost the most sensitive thing in our body. They're sort of the canaries in the coal mine. And their job is to detect when there's any kind of threat or danger present. Now, that threat may be a toxin, or it may be a microbial infection, a virus or a bacteria, or it may be a toxin that's being leaked into the bloodstream as a result of gut permeability or leaky gut, or any number of other stressors like emotional stress, sleep deprivation, many, many other things. So the mitochondria pick up on those stressors. They're detecting little signals that are present in the body as a result of those stressors. And then they're determining whether to direct the body's resources into energy production or whether to direct the body's resources into defense against the threats. A lot of this comes back to some groundbreaking research by a physician named Robert Naviaux, who has a lab for mitochondrial medicine at University of California, San Diego. And he wrote a seminal paper on a topic called the cell danger response. And that's fundamentally what it's all about, is conceptualizing the mitochondria, again, this thing that used to be just conceptualized as sort of these mindless energy generators, as the critical environmental sensor that is actually determining the cell's response and whether energy is being directed, whether resources are being directed into energy production or cellular defense. So the way to think about this is the extent to which your mitochondria are picking up on danger signals from the environment or stress signals shifts them more into danger mode or into energy mode. And the fundamental key is that these two things are mutually exclusive. So the more that one is activated, the more that the other shuts down. In other words, the more that your mitochondria are picking up on those danger signals, the more it shuts down energy mode and turns on danger mode, okay, or defense mode. So that fundamentally is how I conceptualize this epidemic of fatigue. Fatigue is a problem of the mitochondria being switched too much into defense mode and taken out of energy mode.
Another path to understanding cellular fatigue is inflammation. What's the connection and how does inflammation impact our energy?
Inflammation is a really important word. And oftentimes I'll think about it, I'll describe it as like if you stub your toe and you think of the toe as red and throbbing and you can feel the blood pulsing, that's inflammation in your toe. But that same inflammation can happen anywhere in the body. Actually, any health condition with itis at the end of it, so think of colitis or sinusitis or cystitis. Itis means inflammation. So if you have a diagnosis and the end of it is itis, you know that's inflammation in that part of the body. So inflammation can happen anywhere, including in the brain. And what we know now is inflammation in the brain is a cause for dementia and anxiety and depression. So when we look at the research, we really start to understand how important inflammation is to knowing what's going on in the body and how we can solve it. Because inflammation is something we can do something about. We can help decrease inflammation in the body, and by doing that, we can solve a lot of different health issues.
Because of the chemicals in the air, in our food, in our water, our toxic thoughts, chronic stress, we have found ourselves in the sympathetic fight or flight mode all the time. And essentially what that does, it's worn down our body. It's created a burden on metabolism. And unfortunately, this has created systemic inflammation. And that, in my opinion, is the number one cause of chronic fatigue. And so you always see chronic fatigue, chronic pain, and chronic stress linked together with people. It's very rare to see one person with just one. It's always usually interconnected. And ultimately, when you look at the root cause of the issue, that's when everything else starts to reconcile.
Over the last few years, inflammation has been studied extensively, and we now know that it's the root cause, the underlying issue for almost every chronic health problem, from diabetes to heart disease to immune malfunctions. So our body is essentially set to inflame constantly. It's kind of like having a car that you have the gas on a little bit and the brakes on a little bit all the time. Hey, I didn't design it. It seems like a funny way to do it, but your body is cranking out inflammatory hormones to respond to insults in your body. Those might be infections or allergens or whatever it may be. And then your body is at the same time cranking out anti-inflammatory hormones to damp those down. The problem is that when we don't have the constituents that we need to make those anti-inflammatory hormones, the body just slowly ratchets up that inflammation. It's a little bit like leaving the pilot light on in your stove. A day, a month, a year, no problem, but you have that very low level of cooking of your stove. Over 50 years, it destroys your stove. Same with your body. It's not something you can measure with body temperature. It's not something that you feel. It's something that's just constantly, slowly frying all of your tissues, and over the decades, things get damaged. It's a very new phenomenon in human life, human behavior, and it's from all the same kinds of root causes that cause the problems with most of our health kinds of issues. Inflammation is not really the problem. That's one step further down the road from improper eating, improper sleeping, and all the things that cause these energy problems.
Inflammation can impact the body in different ways. Inflammation in the brain, for example, just causes someone to have cognitive deficits. They can't think, they can't focus, they have depression. Inflammation in the joints in the body cause fatigue and pain. Inflammation in muscles just makes you feel like you don't want to move. And then systemic inflammation is all the above. And then there's inflammation in areas of the body we don't even know, like your blood vessels. You can have your blood vessels being destroyed all the time and not even really know it. So it depends on the tissue. But for some people, they have an isolated neuroinflammation. For some people, it's just their joints. But for most people, it's usually systemic. It's every part of the body.
Just the presence of inflammation in the body, and whether that inflammation is from a toxin that's from the environment, maybe it's air pollutants as you're sitting indoors in your house, or maybe it's drinking tap water or water that hasn't been properly put through a filter and still has traces of heavy metals or chlorine disinfection byproducts, or whether you're drinking plastic bottled water with BPA or phthalates in it, or personal care products that have a lot of these compounds in them, those are creating a shift in your body where resources are being shifted away from mitochondrial energy production towards defense responses, towards immune and inflammatory activation. And the bigger that load is on the body in terms of things that are stimulating an immune and inflammatory response, the more that the mitochondria get taken out of energy mode.
So many things cause stress on our cells, on our bodies, and a lot of it's unavoidable, right? So how does the body process physical stress?
When you're in your sympathetic fight or flight and you're running from an actual tiger, then you're going to get a cortisol production because you're going to get, and also you've got your neurotransmitters as well, the noradrenaline, and that's going to give you the ability to run. But when this, for example, you're in this cycle of being in an overly sympathetic state, then you're going to continue to produce this cortisol because you're constantly going to be stressed. So the stress is going to, it's like a vicious cycle because stress produces cortisol, and then that's going to produce the fatigue.
So the basic idea of adrenal fatigue is that our adrenal glands, which are these little glands that sit on top of our kidneys, are a critical part of our body's stress response system. They produce this very important stress hormone called cortisol, which does things like impact on regulate blood sugar levels, as well as impact on immune function and inflammation levels and a variety of other effects. And the idea is that if you have chronic stress, it creates a sort of chronic taxation. It chronically taxes this adrenal system and ultimately sort of wears the adrenals out so that they are not producing enough cortisol. Once you get low cortisol levels or this adrenal fatigue or adrenal exhaustion, that then translates into these symptoms of fatigue and burnout and chronic fatigue and so on. So that's the basic idea of the adrenal fatigue paradigm. And that paradigm has dominated the thinking within, holistic health and functional medicine for decades now.
Too much cortisol in a long period of time and not being able to calm the nervous system down and get into the parasympathetic state, then you're going to stop producing so much cortisol. And when you stop producing the cortisol, then that's when you crash. And that can take, it just depends on the stressor. Like if you have a death in the family, or you're going through bankruptcy, or you have a divorce, that's a bigger stressor than going to work every day and your boss yelling at you. So it depends on what you're experiencing and how long it takes you to get out of that sympathetic state. And so when you have too much cortisol production, then all the other, your entire endocrine system is going to be affected. But your cortisol is your stress hormone, and it's produced from your adrenals. And so that's why adrenal fatigue and adrenal health and, adrenal tonics and adrenal supplements, that's why we focus on that, because it's all about managing the cortisol production.
Sometimes it's tempting to assume that we all have high cortisol, for example, right? Because we go, oh, well, we're all stressed. We must all have high cortisol. But actually, that's not the case. Some people may have too low cortisol in the morning, or maybe they have too high cortisol in the evening. And so what we need to do is we need to know, what is your cortisol level at this point in time in your life? And so what I recommend is doing a test so we can measure that. Now, cortisol can be measured in a blood test, but we want to know your cortisol at different times a day, because cortisol is one of the only hormones that should be high in the morning and gradually decreasing through the day. So we want to measure the cortisol in the morning, the middle of the day, the evening, and at bedtime when it should be the lowest. So instead of doing 4 blood tests, instead we usually use saliva or urine to measure the cortisol at 4 different times a day. And then we can actually find out how stress is affecting your cortisol levels. And then we know how to address it.
I was an avid exerciser. I stopped for 3 months. Never in my life have I done this. But what happened is all of a sudden, I had more energy and I felt better and I wasn't drinking a pot of coffee. And, weight and physicality was the same. It didn't matter at all. Part of that is because when we're driving all day long, our cortisol is up. And you mentioned adrenal function. The cortisol is a function of the adrenal gland. And over time, we can't keep up that level of production. And cortisol is actually catabolic, which means it breaks down tissues. So it breaks down the cells, breaks down our tissues. And anabolic things can't happen. Anabolic is where we build muscle and we build tissue and we restore and we re-energize and we repair damage. So that constant cortisol when we're driven and we don't rest is a really big predictor of aging and of damage to cells and of fatigue as well. So really the margin, I always just call it margin because it's pretty simple for people to imagine, creating margin in our life, whatever that looks like, stopping work at 5 o'clock or maybe taking a break day, or often people will find something that restores them, and it might be hiking or walking. It could be activity, but it's something restorative, and they need to put more of that in and then create some space and margin to actually rest.
There's lots of bad PR about stress. Is there any positive to it, any upside?
As soon as people hear this word stress or stressor, they immediately associate bad. I need to move away from this thing. What I'm telling you is that there are certain kinds of stressors that are enormously beneficial. And I would even go so far as to say essential to your health and may even be the foundation of resilience, energy, disease prevention, and longevity. And that is this whole concept of hormesis or hormetic stressors. So this concept of transient metabolic stress that creates beneficial adaptations kind of sounds like a weird thing. But most people are actually more familiar with it than they realize because exercise, just physical activity exercise, is actually a type of hormetic stress. It's not intrinsically helpful or beneficial. It's something that becomes beneficial because by stressing out the system and stressing out the mitochondria especially, and creating that demand on them to produce more energy, you stimulate beneficial adaptations. And specifically at the mitochondrial level, there are a few adaptations that the body makes. So one is that the mitochondria grow from smaller mitochondria to bigger mitochondria, so they are capable of producing more energy. In addition, the body can also do something called mitochondrial biogenesis, which basically means it can create more mitochondria, can create new mitochondria from scratch. In addition, there's something called the ARE, which is the antioxidant response element. It's sort of like the body's internal antioxidant and anti-inflammatory defense system. And it's hundreds or thousands of times more powerful than any supplement antioxidant that you could take.
Basically, anything that stresses the body without overstressing it produces what's called an adaptive response pattern. So let's get to a bigger picture. Exercise stresses the body, right? Exercise is inflammatory. Exercise creates inflammation. Exercise increases what we would call toxic free radicals. So in the old days, we would say free radicals are all bad for you, et cetera. Well, no, there's a continuum. And without free radicals, we never get the stimulus to make more muscles. So when you exercise, you stress your body, and stressing your body produces all these beneficial responses because the cell's going to go, okay, I need to repair from that injury. And the repair mechanisms are quite beneficial.
Inflammation is one of the best things that an athlete can experience. Any athlete who is training, especially training specifically in the gym, strength and conditioning outside of their actual sport, say a tennis player who's doing squats and presses and cable work in the gym outside of their actual hitting practice. If they're not inducing an inflamed state, at least to a certain extent in the muscle, they're not going to get things like a satellite cell response to allow muscles to grow and become stronger. They're not going to induce an increase in mitochondrial density and the ability to aerobically create ATP during exercise. They're not going to induce that micro tearing of muscle fibers that results in that muscle becoming stronger and more resistant to injury over time. This is why one of the worst things an athlete can do after a training session like that is to go pop some antioxidants, take a bunch of vitamin C or vitamin E or some fancy Amazonian superfood chock full of antioxidants because it quells that inflammatory response. And research study after research study has shown that there's a deleterious response to an exercise session when an athlete attempts to quell the inflammatory response, especially right after they've exercised.
The same thing happens with cold. The same thing happens with burst of low oxygen. So I actually talk about this in lectures. Hypoxia, which is low oxygen, that you might get from, say, going on a mountain hike up to 11,000 feet. That's a stimulus. That's a good thing, right? But as I've often heard them say to athletes, train high, sleep low. Because you don't want to be sleeping with that hypoxia all night long, but you can train at altitude, and training at altitude, stimulates your bone marrow, stimulates your muscles, does all kinds of things. So, the cold stimulus, I think, the Wim Hof method, for people that can do it, it's great.
If you want to prevent damage at the cellular level, the fundamental thing that drives so many different chronic diseases and that is aging us and killing us, the fundamental thing that you need to do is build robustness and strength into that antioxidant response element. So hormesis is the way to do that. You build robustness at the mitochondrial level and in this antioxidant response element through the presence of discomfort, through the presence of transient metabolic stressors. And exercise is only one of many. So we have also temperature stress, so things like heat and cold. We have fasting. We have several different types of exercise. We have phytochemicals from the foods we eat, which also act through hormetic stress pathways. We have breathing practices, breath holding practices that can be a type of hypoxia or low oxygen hormesis. We also have different kinds of light. So for example, UV light, red and near infrared light. There's many, many types of hormetic stress that we need to be exposed to on a regular basis in order to be healthy.
We've been talking a lot about energy and the lack of it on a cellular level. So what do we need to do to boost our cellular strength and our endurance?
Have the nutrients to help your mitochondria do their job. So it's kind of that receiving that shipment when it's received. Now how quickly can they open that box up and use the energy? So that's also done by the muscles. That's why athletes are so good at this. In their quadriceps, they have way more mitochondria. They have glycogen stores where energy can be used very quickly and efficiently. So the amount of aerobic exercise you've done and quality you have to be able to open that box up can really help you use that energy efficiently and quickly. And even without the food, you can do it. So often, let's say I go work out, I'm going to build up lactic acid eventually, and that will cause pain. Well, if we push through that lactic acid and actually keep going, you can actually learn to use that lactic acid for energy. And that's what athletes are very good at doing. Whereas I hear a lot of people saying, I'm tired, my muscles hurt, and they become stagnant. And one of the worst things to do is not obviously to push yourself too hard, but stagnancy also contributes to having more fatigue.
When you look at your nutrition, if you could start to eat foods that are life-giving, and I'm talking simple foods, fruits, vegetables, healthy, naturally sprouted non-GMO grains, the good kinds of nuts and legumes, the foods that your body needs for sustained energy, essentially your body can reconcile all that. Ultimately, we want to get into what's known as the parasympathetic state, the rest and digest state. We want to be able to digest our food. We want to be able to rest. We need to be able to sleep at night. And all of this comes into play when it comes to the foods that we eat.
So very basic things like clean food are huge, and anyone can do that. This is getting rid of processed chemicals, artificial flavorings, anything that's in a package or box or processed you want to get rid of. And people worry about, organic food and the cost, but if you're going to local farmers markets or you're getting things whole and you're cutting them up yourself like vegetables, you can actually get a lot of food for fairly inexpensive, especially when you eat real whole foods that are not packaged or processed. Eliminating some common food allergens is a great place to start as well. Wheat is very common, soy, corn, dairy, egg, sometimes peanut, sugar, and alcohol. Those are the big ones. And if you took that list and you said, for 30 days, I'm going to go off all these foods, I almost guarantee you'd feel better. And that's something that that's something that anyone can do by themselves. Other things are just getting a basic, good quality, professional grade multivitamin with methylated B vitamins. B vitamins alone are really critical for energy, and a lot of people aren't getting them from their diet. So clean food, clean water, which goes without explaining, but a lot of people aren't taking the effort to get clean water. Clean air, so making sure you have an air exchange in your home, maybe an air filter in your home or workplace, basic types of things. And then sleep is absolutely essential. So whatever things that you can do on your own to improve sleep quality, blackout curtains, red lights at night, turning off your cell phone, turning it into airplane mode, and making sure you actually get into bed so that you can get 7 or 8 hours is super helpful.
Fasting has been shown to increase mitochondrial production on its own, which is amazing. Even there's no drug even out there or even a supplement that can do that. Then I use supplements to help the mitochondrial membranes make sure they work well, and then that they have the nutrients they need for that cycle. Just think of it as a wheel. If it's rusty and it's not moving fast, that energy is going to be slow. And if that mitochondria is damaged, which a lot of viruses and infections can do, or even the toxins in the air we're breathing or the heavy metals in our water, then that's also going to make it really sluggish. So you want to remove all those obstacles as much as you can, and then add the nutrients like coenzyme Q10, L-carnitine, D-ribose, NAD or NADH, and a whole gamut of things that the body needs. So I would say if anyone out there is fatigued, you really want to talk to your doctor and start looking at how can I improve my mitochondrial function. I think mitochondrial dysfunction is this new term that, has been coming around for the last 5 years, and it's going to be sort of the hallmark of looking at energy production, because that is where our energy is produced.
We keep going back to the same things, lifestyle, life choices, food choices, and eating nutritious food. So we could talk about some herbal medicine that would be of benefit, but bottom line, it's doing things that help you get into a parasympathetic state, which is resting, of course, sleeping very definitely, but also meditation, breathing exercises, therapy, anything that just helps you come down from that peak of hyper-awareness, worrying about your job, your family, your boss, all those things that people worry about, and coming into balance between those two sides of the system.
Find something that you love doing that you will do consistently. Because if you don't really enjoy it, you're probably not going to sustain it and stick to doing it in the long term. So I think that aspect of finding a type of physical activity that you absolutely love doing and can be immersed in and can develop a love for, or can cultivate a love for and genuinely enjoy it for its own sake and look forward to it, I think that's the ideal in terms of your relationship with physical activity.
If you're dealing with pain, fatigue, exhaustion, I promise you, through the information that you're going to learn through this documentary series, you can reverse this and you can stop this, but you have to have hope and you have to have faith and you have to believe and you have to do what you know is right regardless of how you feel. And sometimes you have to fake it till you make it. And that's sometimes you got to get off your butt like I did and have to go force yourself to exercise because you know it's going to give you more energy, even though you don't have the energy to begin with. Promise you, you do the things that are being explained to you in this series and they will manifest. And you should have to have that childlike faith and expectation that everything will change, because it will.
As you can see, the mitochondria do a lot. Making energy is part of the deal, and there's the natural inflammation that comes with that process. Managing and balancing this process is the key to living a healthy and happy life. There's a dynamic balance between life's growth and the natural byproducts which lead to inflammation and aging. Our ability to naturally reduce oxidative stress through the ARE mechanism is proving to be a key factor in longevity. Here's some of the key things to remember from this section. Mitochondria extract energy from macromolecules in what's called the Krebs cycle. The byproduct of energy metabolism is oxidative phosphorylation, which can lead to inflammation in the body if left unchecked. Mitochondria are sensitive to threats like toxins, microbes, or other stressors like emotional upheaval and sleep deprivation. Fatigue is partly a product of the mitochondria being pulled out of energy mode and into defense mode. Chronic elevated cortisol is an indicator of premature aging. A hormetic stressor is a transient metabolic stress that induces net benefits. They stimulate beneficial adaptations in our body via our genetics. The ARE, or antioxidant response element, is an internal mechanism that's thousands of times more powerful than any antioxidant you can take. Types of hormetic stressors include exercise, temperature, hypoxia as in breathing exercises, fasting, phytochemicals from foods, and light hormesis in the forms of ultraviolet, red, and infrared. Please take a moment and share this series with your friends and family right now. As you've already seen, this information is critical to their recovery, and let's face it, their doctors don't have time to sit down and explain any of this. They may not even be read up on this latest science, which is an unfortunate fact about our medical system. We need to take matters into our own hands and learn how to live healthfully in the modern world. This series is about to get into powerful and actionable things we can do right now to fix your health and feel better. You owe it to yourself to watch it all and take notes. Share it with those people in your life that are simply dragging. It may very well be the spark they need to get moving again. Please do it right now as each episode expires in 24 hours. As we round out and conclude the first episode of this powerful series, you can see how critical energy is in all of life's processes. Fixing the energy problems in our bodies is the first stop to feeling well. In the episodes ahead, we're going to dive into the specifics of why you might not be feeling great and explore how to solve those problems. We've laid out the series to help you understand the why, give you real-life solutions, and hopefully make it all impactful each step of the way. Please make room in your schedule for what's coming. Think about it this way. Being tired affects every aspect of your life. Not having enough energy to meet life's demands means you skimp out on quality family time, on exercise, on work, basically everything you can. Energy fuels life. When you learn how to find it and have more energy each day, pretty much everything gets better. You have more time because you're not dragging. You're more patient with your loved ones. And your body starts to recover and heal. Your immunity stays strong. We'll see you next time for episode 2, which is all about food and what we're eating every day.